Alex Hoffman is the vocalist of the technical death metal band Fallujah. They'll be releasing their new album Dreamless on April 29th. Alex, thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely, no problem.
Now, I was really excited for this interview because I'm actually a massive fan, especially of the Flesh Prevails. I mean, I listen to that album at least once a week. But for those who aren't familiar with your sound, could you talk a bit about it? Because it's kind of, I think, an interesting and unique sound.
Yeah, I mean, I think Fallujah, I guess one of our biggest pet peeves that we're trying to remedy is kind of being lumped into this sort of technical death metal scene. And I think this album with Dreamless is, I guess, definitely our riskiest album, and it's our most proactive effort to have Fallujah not really be as easily categorized in terms of being a technical death metal band. I think for us, even the idea of being known as a technical death metal band or a death metal band in general is sort of for us unfulfilling the last few years. So with this new album, we're trying to, I guess, break those constraints and have Fallujah be a bit more, I don't know if palatable is the right word, but have Fallujah be diverse in the way that we've kind of always been hoping to achieve.
I've actually seen the term atmospheric death metal band going around a lot, and I fear that may cause the same sort of problem of lumping in.
Yeah, I mean, I like the term atmospheric death metal a bit, or even just atmospheric metal a bit more, for the reason that people don't really know what that means. That when they hear the term atmospheric, they're kind of just like, oh, well, is it technical? Is it progressive? Is it melodic? They're not really sure what it means, and I think that's constructive in its own way. Where, because I don't think Fallujah is necessarily that technical of a band, nor do I think we're really that proggy, and we're not necessarily black metal, we're not brutal death metal. I mean, I think atmospheric death metal or atmospheric metal is the most comprehensive term. I don't really know what it is, but I know that it's less atmospheric, at least what a fan might be able to dig their teeth into when they listen to it.
In terms of the atmosphere, I mean, I think you guys and some other bands out there are kind of interesting in the, vaguely death metal influenced scene, because I feel like black metal's been there for quite a while, and in a way, death metal's sort of just beginning to catch up.
It's from an atmospheric perspective, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it was in those roots where this kind of idea was born. I mean, for the longest time, I guess when we were teenagers and early 20s, I guess we're still early 20s, but we were really into bands like Wolves in the Throne Room, Lantlos, Alcest, what else? Nocturnal Depression, Enmerkar, Cold World. A lot of those kind of more underground black metal bands that were more focused on these kind of entrancing parts and these big atmospheres and kind of generating emotions through melody as opposed to just ripping brutality. That's kind of where the whole thing was born from. And yeah, for whatever reason, maybe bands just couldn't really execute it for the longest time properly. But I think putting it in a death metal context is cool because I guess one of the big advantages or things that I like about playing in Fallujah is that in a live environment, the music is still very aggressive and energetic. So, I think a lot of those bands, as amazing as they were live, they're not exactly the same kind of band that you're going to circle pit and stage dive to. They serve a different purpose, whereas I want to be able to have that same emotion and, evoke memories of nostalgia or evoke, I guess, deeper, darker emotions that are less tapped into in this genre, but still be able to come to a live show and think wow, there was tons of energy there and the thing was still fun. So I think those are kind of the elements that we tap into with death metal, is that it's still fun music live, and it still is pushing you to have an energetic live show.
Now, in terms of that, the emotion of it, I mean, there isn't a great, I don't want to sound condescending, but there isn't a great amount of emphasis on emotion in death metal as a whole. Why was that important for you to say, regardless of what other people are doing, regardless of, things, we want to actually impute a lot of that into our music?
Because I think that's it's the most powerful force a band can have. I mean, that's one of the biggest things that's unfulfilling about a lot of music for me. I mean, not just metal. I mean, especially metal, but not just metal. Is that a lot of it doesn't, to me personally, evoke emotions other than maybe aggression or hypermasculinity or it doesn't. A lot of metal, while it may be good technically, doesn't really make me feel anything diverse. It's kind of like cracking open a PBR and chugging it. It's not. There aren't the same nuances, and there aren't the same delicacies found in other music. And I think that's kind of why Fallujah sounds the way it does, is because we pick a song and we're like, all right, how do we want this song to make us feel? As opposed to, is this brutal riff really going to get the shredders stoked? I mean, we approach it more so as how does an album make you feel, and how do songs sort of act as stepping stones to arriving there.
In terms of, you said differentiating yourself a little bit back from the Flesh Prevails, how specifically do you think that Dreamless is different from the Flesh Prevails?
I think it's incredibly different. I mean, I think there's a lot of parts that we didn't really want to tap into in Flesh Prevails, especially, songs like Scar Queen or Abandon, or the intro track, Face of Death. The songs are way more groove oriented, and we're trying to harness a lot of emotions in these kind of larger, expansive groove sections, as opposed to Flesh Prevails, which I think was a lot faster of a record. It was definitely more death metal. It had these kind of like punishing parts where, this kind of wall of sound, blast beats with big atmospheric guitars over them. And while we still wanted to sound like Fallujah, but in doing that, we wanted the album, I guess, to be more energizing and more, I guess, headbangable, to put it most simplistically. We wanted the album to kind of have this groove element that I think Fallujah has been missing for a long time, mainly for the reason that we were kind of establishing ourselves in the death metal scene. But I think that we really have set ourselves up in a positive way to be able to take risks more with our music, and kind of, I think a lot of fans have had a taste slowly along the way of where we're going to arrive. So I think that, a lot of the riskier parts on the album sound less abrasive to the listener. And I don't know, I think the album is just way more diverse, and that's why it's kind of, it's been really exciting to see the response from it.
Now, in the press release for this album, it says that instead of writing from your own personal experience, this album's lyrics are more viewed from other people's perspective. Is that sort of a different process, going about writing that?
Yes and no. I mean, the songs are still rooted in my own personal experiences, but the difference is that I wanted to have a different perspective or a different window to describe, because in that sense, if I just wrote about the same experiences over and over again, then I wouldn't really be pushing myself farther from where Flesh Prevails was. So I took a lot of these same emotions and these same, I guess, personal experiences, but tagging them with a film that I felt represented it the most, or I guess some of my favorite films, and I guess the parallels that I draw into them. And in that respect, was able to tell maybe some of the same stories, or tell them maybe not so literally, but have so many different aspects where, with film you have the scene, you have the setting, you have the emotions on the characters' faces, you have dialogue, you have backstory. You kind of have all these different artistic elements to work with, as opposed to just your own memory, which sometimes can be your own worst enemy. So I thought it was completely different for me, basically writing about something that was real to me, but just told through a completely different context. But it was more fun in that regard. I mean, it was difficult writing the lyrics for this album. I mean, every Fallujah album is really hard vocally to write for. But this one was just, I felt like I had all this material that I was able to work with, and it was exciting for me because I've never really taken that kind of risk before, kind of taking someone else's portrayal and having to retell it through my own eyes.
Now, speaking about your vocals more generally, I was interested to read that you kind of don't necessarily, correct me if I'm phrasing this wrong, but don't necessarily like metal vocalists. You're more attracted to artists like Chino Marino from the Deftones. and Patrick Morrissey from the Smiths. How do you go about being doing death metal vocals when you're kind of not necessarily that attracted to those kind of vocalists?
Because ultimately, at the end of the day, my vocal abilities are there and they're not going anywhere. So for me, I'm still able to push myself because when you're a vocalist, you know how your body works. You know what your capabilities are and you know how to practice and push yourself. And for me, just putting on another death metal record and trying to mimic what someone else is doing is just not constructive to me. I think my voice is tricky because it's not really deep in death metal, but it's not exactly polished either. It's kind of more of a mid-rangey roar. And I've realized over the years where I can go with it. And there's been times, like, for example, on older records, my high screams were way more frequent because of where my voice was at the time. And then I felt like my high screams took a bit of a downturn, so I did them less, whereas now they've become different. They sound different than the old ones. Your voice is always changing, and you kind of have to know how to harness it properly. And as far as, like, vocalist inspiration, I can't remember a time when I really, really was looking to death metal for me to better myself. I just kind of wanted to do that internally. And some of my favorite vocalists are all, in a lot of ways, doing things that I know I'll never be able to do.
Now, for this album, you signed up for Nuclear Blast. How has that experience differed from your last label?
To put it bluntly, having more money is great. It's like in a scene like this where, like everyone's kind of fighting for the scraps, having a real label that has a team of professionals who can help you set things up is infinitely better. Nuclear Blast is just simply a larger company with a bigger roster than Unique Leader was. And so it's kind of the natural order of things. You have a smaller label to help you get to where you are, and then you move up to something bigger that's more appropriate for your size. And so Nuclear Blast has been great. I'm in constant contact with people. There's a whole team of guys who, help you do things that otherwise I would have to do. So it's pretty incredible. I guess just have this whole team really working and sharing your enthusiasm for putting out a record properly.
Now, additional on the albums to the guitar, the bass, drums, and obviously the vocals, you have a lot of other things going on. What exactly are these sounds, and how do you go about creating them?
A lot of the other songs have electronic elements, which are, another layer upon many layers on the album. Those are done by me at home. I have quite a bit of a background in electronic music, and I produce electronic music. So for me, it's kind of cool being able to play with synthesizers and electronic elements or creating glitchy beats. And then we also try and do the same thing with the guitars, where we kind of wash the guitars in layers and effects to sort of blur the line between electronic and actually humanized played instruments. So we just kind of, Fallujah is just all about layers, like all the different layers of things that you can apply and remove, that I think, most effectively harness the sort of atmosphere that we're always going for. I think it is in those layers that I guess the term atmospheric really stands its ground.
Now, as far as I can see, you haven't played in Australia. Is there any discussion about touring down under, maybe?
Yes.
Excellent.
I actually spoke about it with my people this morning. I can't really tell you any details.
No, of course not.
But it's happening. Don't worry.
Cool. Cannot wait. Final question, and I try to ask this of all my US guests because it's kind of I'm a bit fascinated by it. And it's fine if you don't have an opinion on it. That's cool. But do you have any thoughts on the presidential race?
Yes, I do. I don't necessarily think that I can speak for Fallujah as a band as far as what our comprehensive political views are. But I guess the one prevailing emotion of the last few weeks is fear to a large degree. I think there's a lot of unnerving and unsettling realities that, every 4 or 8 years you kind of get reminded of. America is such a diverse country and is such a big place that I think when you're not in election season, it becomes very easy to forget that there are people who live in the same country, who identify with the same nationality, that are very, very different than in almost every way from what your own life is. And I feel like that is getting brought to the surface in a way that previous presidential elections didn't. I think it's very emblematic of our time, but it goes to show that, I don't know, things are freaking me out more this time than I feel like they did last time.
So Fallujah will be releasing their new album Dreamless on April 29th. Alex, thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely, man. Thank you.